So today we're going to talk about the dopamine hijack. And I'm going to start with a very extreme example. And the reason I'm using this extreme example is because sometimes when we view things at the extremes, we can learn the lessons in an easier to absorb way. So down in Houston, just a couple days ago, there were three sisters, 14, 15, and 16. And two of them were on their phones excessively, Snapchat, social media, the whole thing, TikTok. And one of them was playing video games. And the mother and these three daughters have had an ongoing battle about the phones because the mother felt, according to interviews, that the phones and technology were getting in the way of their ability to connect as a family. So finally, the mother, with extreme frustration, decided to shut off the Wi-Fi and hide the modem. Well, the three girls, 14, 15, and 16, did not take that lightly, and they got together and they said, I'm going to put the link down below to the story, ABC News. They decided to kill her. So they got kitchen knives and they went after her. The grandmother was in the house and she intervened. She got hurt. The police were called. Neighbors heard the police and they came over, and nobody was killed, but these three girls tried to kill their mother. Now, I don't know a whole lot more about the story, but I'm kind of assuming and kind of suspecting that these three young ladies probably had some pre-existing mental health challenges. But this is an interesting story because it illustrates the fact that technology can hijack our brains. Technology can make us do things, can have us take actions that are destructive because of the way it takes over the reward circuitry of the brain. So now what I'm going to I wrote about this 15 years ago in my book, Cyber Junkie. But the problem is only getting worse. The subtitle, as I've said before, of Cyber Junkie was Escape the Gaming and Internet Trap. Well, let me tell you, we haven't escaped. So to understand how technology is hijacking the circuitry of our brain, I'm going to start to tell you a little bit about dopamine. Dopamine is a neurotransmitter. See, the way the brain is constructed, there are nerve cells, billions of them in the brain, called neurons. But the neurons don't actually touch. There's a small space between the neurons called the synapse. If you're watching in the United Kingdom, you guys call it the synapse. So the synapse needs a certain substance for the electric nerve impulse from one neuron to the other to be conducted. Those substances that do that, and there's several of them, are called neurotransmitters. Now, dopamine is one such neurotransmitter, and it's involved in brain networks that are responsible for coordination of movement, for our ability to inhibit and regulate our emotions, and our brain circuitry involved with the experience of reward. Now, many of you might understand that when we have people who are substance users, substance abusers, alcoholics, drug addicts, what's involved there is that those substances become the desire, the craving for those substances becomes embedded in those reward circuits, those dopamine dependent reward circuits. Now, it's much more complicated than that. I'm trying to distill it down. Let me give you a real world example of how nature evolutionarily, it's a great word, let's say that again, evolutionarily, nature has constructed these dopamine networks to allow us to rouse our behavior, to focus our behavior to achieve a goal. It really gets into the survival instinct. And I'm going to give you a real world example. Luckily, I live around a lot of trees and there's hundreds of squirrels around here. And in the fall, when things start to get cold, those cold temperatures trigger release of dopamine in squirrels. And you've probably seen it. When the temperature starts to get cold, those squirrels go into high gear and they collect nuts and they're running around and they engage in what might even look like hyperactivity because they're storing those nuts to survive the winter. If you could peer into the brains of those squirrels, what you would see is elevated levels of dopamine. Dopamine is about survival, and it's also about feeling a sense of satisfaction. And these are things that we all need. I'll tell you where else dopamine comes into place. If you're in a classroom and you're a kid and the teacher's talking about something that's boring, if you have a brain that is a neurotypical brain, your brain will still release dopamine, which will allow you to focus and take notes because you know, because you have adequate levels of dopamine and you can take action on it, that maybe in a week or two, what the teacher's saying could appear on a test. And therefore, you will take notes right now because there's a reward down the road. Well, you know that the ADHD students in the classroom, they don't get that. It's called a phasic release of dopamine. They don't get it. So an ADHD student will often not take notes because they don't have that experience of long-term reward giving them adequate supplies of dopamine. So there's how we get the ADHD angle in there a little bit. Many people, many theoreticians have talked about the dopamine dependence theory of ADHD. We're not going to get into that today. Let me now segue from dopamine into how technology and the modern world has hijacked the dopamine, or let's use a big word here, dopaminergic networks of the brain. So here's the deal. When you're lying in bed at 9:30 and a notification goes off on your phone, that notification releases dopamine. Okay? So you pick up, you can't help yourself. You wanna, the dopamine has you anticipate that there's gonna be a reward. So you pick up your phone. Was it rewarding? Probably not. But in those seconds before you impulsively, perhaps it even felt instinctually, before you pick up your phone in those 3 seconds, you have the anticipation that there could be a potential reward by that notification in your phone. And so you cannot help yourself but to pick up your phone, okay? So that's what's happening. Rather than dopamine help us look toward the future and help rouse our action to achieve long-term goals. See, dopamine is released not with the payoff. It's not released for the A on the test that you get. It's released because of the anticipation that the right behaviors now will lead to that result, and then you'll feel good about it when you get the A on the test. It will make you feel good about yourself. It will give you the sense of accomplishment and achievement. That's what dopamine's meant to do. It's meant to channel your behavior towards goals, towards achievements that will enhance your life, that will make you feel good. But here's the problem. Technology has the impact that we can achieve dopamine release with no effort. It's instant gratification. 15-second reels on TikTok, 15 seconds on Facebook, and what happens is we watch these videos, they do not give us a sense of satisfaction, and so we crave more and more and more and more because we're craving satisfaction. We're anticipating reward, but the reward is just not there. And so what this does is it wears out our dopamine cells, those neuronal networks that are heavily dopamine dependent. And so what happens is those dopaminergic networks in our brains don't work so well. So here is the tragic aspect of it. First of all, like those 3 girls in Houston who tried to kill their mother, we get so transfixed on technology, on on watching the TikTok videos, on engaging with technology, that if somebody takes it away, we don't have the emotional regulations capability to inhibit our emotions. So I regularly get calls from families where they took the game away or they shut the internet off. People throw things, they break walls, they break doors, they utter insane, profane phrases toward their parents that they never would have done before these behaviors. So here's what we find. We live in this world of instant gratification. And look, I'm just as guilty as everybody else. I have to be very careful. So, I had the experience that I get a notification. Maybe it's just a text. So I pick my phone up, I look at the text, and then 45 minutes later, I realize I've been scrolling on Facebook for the last 45 minutes. When I realize that, I often have a sinking feeling because I realize that the scrolling on Facebook hasn't done anything for me, and I actually feel a little bit depleted. I feel emotionally depleted, and I get these sinking feelings in my body. I have to be careful too. Those of you who are Facebook friends with me, you'd see that there are times when I don't post on Facebook for a while because I take breaks. So, this is a rather complex phenomenon, but here is the end result of this culture of instant gratification that leads to the anticipation of satisfaction and reward without those good feelings, the joy that comes from actually having rewards, actually having achievements and accomplishments. Watching a 15-second face of TikTok video on some guy who can eat 5 hot dogs in 15 seconds does not leave us feeling like we achieved anything. But that's what dopamine is supposed to do. It's supposed to harness our energies, channel our energies toward a goal. So, what we all are suffering from, including me, and I have to be really careful, is we have constant craving for whatever the behavior is. You're TikToking or Snapchatting or video gaming, whatever it is, YouTube, constant craving without the experience of satisfaction. So what are the effects of that? Well, first of all, our attention span as a culture is shrinking. And that's why if you watched a previous video that I did, I said, I asked the question, is the whole world becoming ADHD? Because we are seeing a shrinking of attention. We're also finding that motivation is going down. There are actually lots of studies building up that find that especially in young people and young adults, motivation is stalling. It's going down. And those of us who are in that cycle of technology, where we are responding to technology, we are seeking out technological entertainment, we're actually being robbed of joy. We don't have that deep experience of satisfaction that itself leads to joy. I mean, when you get an A on a test, just to use that example again, you feel pretty good about yourself. You call people, you think about it, you talk about it, and that experience fuels you the next time to keep going, to keep going, to keep going. Well, those processes are all being interrupted. Now, let's just take a second. And you can see that I'm overflowing with thoughts and energy about this because I just see it as a tremendous problem. Let's just think about this instant gratification. I want entertainment. I don't have to work for it. I don't have to go to the movies. I don't have to find things to do. I don't have to call people. I just pick up my phone. I watch 15-second reels over and over and over and over again. Do I need validation? Okay, well, if I need validation from other human beings, I can just post on Facebook or Instagram or whatever, and I can get likes. That's instant gratification. I don't have to work for it. Now, I want to go back to this idea. Dopamine is about anticipation, and the anticipation is supposed to drive us toward hard work. And the hard work, the persistence, that leads to achievements and accomplishments. So we're not getting that, okay? And that is just an absolutely huge and growing problem. I get calls from it every single day. I get calls from families in the extreme. I actually have had families call me where somebody did try to physically harm their parent when they shut down the Wi-Fi. I've had those calls. Definitely, I get a lot of calls where there's breaking of doors, there's bashing in walls, these kind of things. Well, why is that? Why do we, I mean, it's useful to go into why these extreme incidents occur, because those extreme incidents actually illustrate what's happening to all of us. So I'm going to go a little bit into the brain again, and there are kind of three regions that are very, shall we say, heavily innervated with dopamine receptors, cells that are at dopamine receptors. But we're going to talk about one, the prefrontal cortex, and that's where a lot of higher order thinking goes on, and impulse control and things like that. Well, when you are involved in a situation where your dopaminergic reward system has been hijacked by technology, guess what? You're taxing out that dopaminergic system. You're stressing out the prefrontal cortex, the PFC, if you will. I wrote a song about the PFC. I'll sing it for you at some point, but the PFC is being stressed out. Well, there are many absolutely important functions that the PFC is responsible for. And you know what? A lot of those functions are what we call executive functions. And those executive functions, incidentally, are what typically don't work well in ADHD individuals. But I'm going to go for one of those executive functions, emotional regulation. So with these girls down in Houston, this is a problem of emotional regulation. They let their upset, their extraordinary dissatisfaction move them toward violence. But if you think about somebody throwing things, you take a normally placid individual and they lose at the game, or you want your child to get off the game and they curse at you, they throw things. This is because the stressing out of the prefrontal cortex, I mean, I'm oversimplifying here, but you stress that out. It's not working properly. You don't have the dopamine levels and functioning to inhibit behavior. So I said at the very beginning of doing this podcast that I was going to give you solutions. So down below in the links, you're going to find the article to the girls who tried to kill their mother. You're going to find an article in Psychology Today by a guy named Kyle Brown, who wrote a really good article just a couple days ago called The Dopamine Hijack. Very similar stuff that's in my book on neuroscience in the Cyber Junkie book. And I'm also going to put a free download. I'm going to let you download a book for free called Get Off That Game Now, The Essential Family Guide to Healthy Screen Behavior. And what that book will do, there's a tech fast in there, and it guides you through the preparation for a tech fast, actually doing the tech fast, and how to live a more balanced life in relation to technology in general. So please consider downloading that book. I'm going to do a podcast on an actual tech fast in a week. But until then, consider at least one night a week where you do not use your phone. You come home from work, you put your phone upstairs, you don't touch it, you don't look at notifications, nothing. Consider going into your settings and turning off notifications for a variety of apps that you really don't need, because getting those notifications is drawing our attention, it's drawing our energy, and it's screwing around with our dopaminergic networks. Consider those two things for right now. Get the book, Get Off That Game Now. I'm giving it to you free, and consider doing a tech fast for yourself and your family. I want to leave you with one other thing, because I want you to have some rich and vivid images to really let this learning cement. One of the sort of metaphors for this situation is what happens with type 2 diabetes. With the tech addiction, we're kind of bathing our brains in excess amounts of dopamine by being plugged into technology that's causing dopamine release over and over again uninterruptedly. And this is the same kind of situation that happens with type 2 diabetes. In type 2 diabetes, people are taking in too much sugar, they're not getting enough exercise, and so the situation that arises is called insulin resistance. So the insulin receptors on the cells that need it, they become resistant to insulin, and so you produce more and more insulin, and the more insulin you produce, the less sensitive those insulin receptors become, and so eventually it gets to a situation where the body just can't metabolize sugar enough because the insulin receptors are so damaged. This is the same situation that we're dealing with, where these dopamine receptors are getting taxed, they're getting stressed, and so when we need motivation, when we need a sense of satisfaction in our lives, we're not getting it because we've stressed out, we've taxed out those dopaminergic networks. So and it's also akin to alcoholism. A lot of you may know people that have had problems with alcohol, and one of the things that we all sort of intuitively know is when people start out drinking, maybe they get drunk after 3 beers, but if they keep that behavior up, they need 6, they need 9, they need 12. That's called tolerance. And that's the same thing that operates here. So, once again, thank you for watching. We are going to be doing these videos 3 days a week. Our goal here is to help people live healthier, happier, and more successful lives. And that's what I've been doing as a life coach for the last 3 decades. Please check the links out below. Please do yourself a favor and download my free ebook. All you got to do is click on the link and put your email. I'll email it to you. And please keep coming back, and please share these videos. And one last thing, please hit subscribe, because we need other people to see these videos, and there's no better way to do that than to hit subscribe. Thank you so much.